Gonna try to get another short video out this week, and this one's gonna be about using Storybook with Ionic and Vue JS. There's a couple of extra things you need to do to get it set up to work fine with Ionic, to get the styles loaded and to get the Ionic plugin kind of injected into the main Vue object. I got some notes here that I will eventually convert into a blog post to go along with the video, but for now, let's just get the video out. As usual, please make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Always open to suggestions on other content I can create that people find helpful. This video actually came out from someone asking me to update my React post, which I will do after this. But in going through and doing the research on the React one, I realized I had never written one for Vue.js. So let's hop into the code. So first off, let's, it's been up on the screen here, but it says Storybook, build bulletproof UI, components faster, open source, React, Vue, Angular, blah, 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 blah. Here's the upside I see in this. You're building an application. Let's just start with the list view, right? You got an application, it's got a list of objects that you need to render, and each object is inside of a list item, and a list item is maybe an image, a couple of fields, and a bunch of other crap, right? So the current process now is every time you want to make an edit, you have to fire up the app, you need to run the database needs to make the query comes back, the query needs to load the data into the UI, and then you make an edit, and then you realize, oh, that's not good enough. And so you just have this constant cycle of going back and forth every single time you need to make a minor change to a UI component. Basically what Storybook does is it allows you to break down your components into smaller pieces that you can use and edit, and then it also has ways to kind of mock the data that you inject into the component. It's got some cool UI here that allows you to kind of really just customize it right inside of what they call the canvas. So if the fields change, you can adjust it. They give you back action, so you can see kind of responses from events that are fired off from the specific components. It's pretty cool stuff. But in this first video, we're going to focus simply on just getting the thing set up to work with Vue. So as usual, I have my basic Vue project here that I stripped down to almost nothing. Where did it go? It's right now just this blank tab. Just a blank page. We're just going to put a simple component in here that'll look similar to a login form. It'll have an email and a password field, and we're going to emit two events from it. One is when you click the login button, and one is when you click the cancel button. Let's get started. See, they have a separate Vue panel you can go to. They talk to you about Vue. The install is pretty straightforward. We're doing Vue 3 projects, so we're going to copy this here, which is the SB init, and we'll go here into our terminal, and we'll just give it a go. Okay, so now we have Storybook installed, so let's fire it up. So they give you a couple of examples that you can play, kind of get a feel for what's going on. We'll leave them here now, just to talk to you a little bit about the layout of what's happened. If we go back to, let's shrink this out of the way. If we go back to our project, you can see it embedded some files that Storybook needs. We'll actually use a couple of these. And then it also created this folder in here called Stories, which this is where you add your stories. And then your stories appear here. So we will start by, I like to just copy something that exists already to get my feet wet. So let's go into this header view story. And we can just take a quick look at basically what a story is. And sorry, that's the view. Let's look at the header view stories. Stories are kind of made up of this template, which is really a container that you're running your component in. So this is the my header component that's running inside of this template. And then there's ways to create multiple instances of this template that appear, and you can pass parameters or arguments that get fed into your component. Hopefully, as I step through a simple example here, a lot of this will start to make sense. It took me a while to kind of make sense of some of this, and honestly, I don't think the documentation is quite that clear. But let's see if I can do a little bit better to complement what the documentation has for you. Clearly, let's copy this story. So we'll copy our own story. So we'll say copy, paste, and we're going to call this our, let's rename this, and we're going to say this is our Ionic test stories. Now we have our Ionic test stories. And so now let's see what we have. Oh, I got to rename it. So the next thing is it's using this title to control how it's placed. We want ours to be test, save, and now let's come back. Now you can see we have our separate section here of where our components are going to be. we are going to start with our own component now. So let's go back to our project, to our part, and talk about the stuff that we're more familiar with. So if we look at our home view, right now there's nothing here, but we want to create our own component, and let's create our component, and we're going to call it just login form.vue. And we're going to use our little handy dandy template generator. So we get the basics of our template here. Name, login form. So now we have our login form, and our login form exists there. And so the first thing we want to do is just make sure our form is showing up. So, all right, so we're just going to put some basic text in there for our login form. Export default login form. Let's go to our home view. Put our login form here. Then, of course, we need to import it. And then let's add it to our components. So now we have our login form, and our login form appears on our page. Okay, so there's our login form. Now, if we go to, let's go back to our story. We don't want our header stories, we want our test stories, and we need a component. So we're going to use our login form. Login form. The component we want to use is our login form, and the way we render it is called a login form, and there's no parameters being passed to it. And we don't need both of these right now. We just need a default. So I just call it default. And we're not passing any arguments, but let's just put this in here just in case. So we'd say default args. And this is if you were actually passing arguments to a component. We'll cover that in a later video. Okay, so now let's go back to our story. And you can see we have our login form showing up inside of there. So one of the first things you might have noticed when we look at this is like we don't have our Ionic fonts. Like here, you can see how we have the default Ionic font. Actually, let's go back and do something else to make it abundantly clear our form isn't the way it's supposed to be. We know that an Ion button, login, and we're going to need an Ion button, create account. So when you put these buttons in, first of all, when we look at the page here, you see how they look the right way. We have the Ion style, the font, and everything's in, but when we look at our test, none of it's there. And it's not there because we haven't kind of wrapped this component with the Ionic magic, and that's the kind of prime purpose of this video. So let's go back here. This is where we start to make changes here. So when Storybook launches, this is kind of the main JS it launches, and then also this kind of preview is where you can kind of set up some things that will wrap each one of the stories that are deployed. So clearly, if you take a look at how Ionic starts up, clearly you can see we got all these styles. We can move all the styles over into our preview JS. Let's go back to our main TS, and we're going to take all of these styles, and we're going to copy them over. So that's how we're going to start. And you want to drop them here in preview. So we'll come down here to preview, we'll just put them at the top because that's what I like to do. And so now let's see what we get. Can't resolve theme variable. So we need to get this path right here. Okay. So we're part of the way there. We got our variables, we got our styles all imported. But remember that this form actually in our world, in our home, it lives inside of a page, and also this page lives inside of an app. And also the Vue plugin, the Ionic plugin's been added to the Create app. So the way you get the app back here inside of preview is this is all the Ionic setup you need to do. So let me just, like I said, let me just cut and paste this in and then kind of explain what I'm doing. Okay, so first we need to import from Ionic Vue the actual Vue plugin and then the actual app element that needs to wrap everything. Let's try to keep our imports all up top here. So you can use Storybook Vue.3 to actually get the app, which maps to this app, this created app here, and then we're just going to do the exact same thing here. We're going to put the use Ionic on top of it. So that's what we're doing here. We say use Ionic Vue, and we get that on it. Then the next thing we're doing down here is we can create this global decorator, and what this says is for every story that I render, there's two components that need to be utilized, and one is the actual story, and what we're saying is the Ionic app, because we want to wrap everything inside of an Ionic app. So let's see if that gets us closer to what we're looking for. Let's go to my test, and as you can see, it clearly does. Okay, I was trying to figure out why this is looking all crazy, but I just realized that I haven't actually, even in my form, I didn't import the appropriate component. So let's make sure we import the Ionic components. Okay, and so we've added our Ion buttons here, and our form looks. It's got a template. Let's just write this thing with a div. Okay. So now we have our login form set up. This is just my pet peeve. I like to see a little bit of padding. So I will go into my story and I can just do this. I can put a div and I can say class Ion padding. All right, so now, as you can see, we have our form here, but now I have it inside a Storybook. And inside a Storybook, I can just use Storybook to kind of test the changes and everything instead of, complete every time having to reload my application. So imagine if you have multiple components. Like right now, this login form is just easy. As soon as you start the app, it's there. So it's not really an issue. But let's assume that this form was like embedded inside the application and it needed to be in a specific state. You don't need to deal with any of that now. We can just go right over to our test. We have it rendered for us. And any changes that we want to make to kind of update the form, we can kind of just do directly, and it will render those changes for us. So now if I go back to my form, so now I am in my login form, and I know that my login form needs some fields. So one of the things that we want to do is let's put this guy inside of a card. So if I say Ion card, okay, and as I mentioned before, I'm going to copy and paste some stuff over to make our lives easier. And that's going to be specifically the input form. Okay, so in our form, we want to take a email and password. So let's create a ref in here to keep track of that. So we'll say const credentials. And then we need to return this. So let's put credentials. Let's add this import to Vue. Let's get our other components in here first. So we need our Ion card content. Let's add these down here on the bottom. So they're added, and then now let's fix this ref. So we need to do an import define, and then ref. And let's wrap this thing in a define line. Okay, now let's fix this. Why is this guy not? Okay, so now you can see we have our two fields. And we have the credentials, so it should be capturing the data as I enter my values in my fields. But what we want to do is we want to be able to emit events that let me know when the user clicked login or when the user clicked create account. And you should be able to see the results down here in the actions. And that's what we're trying to do. So the way that we're going to make our app work is we're going to emit an event whenever they click login or create account. Well, also I noticed I did not import any of my input fields, so let's get them imported. So Ion item, Ion input, and let's add them to the bottom here. And so now we have the data, we have our credentials. We need to associate and have click event, and we're going to say on click handle. And then down here, we're going to say click handle create account. Since we've created these new functions, we need to add them up here. We'll just keep it simple and cheat and add them right here in the return. Let's kind of clean that up. And these guys want something to happen in here because that's what we're getting this error for. So what you get here inside of setup, you get your props, but then also you get context, and inside that context comes emit. And as I said, we want to actually emit an event. So what we're going to do down here is when you click handle login, we're going to emit a login event. So we'll say emit. And we're going to pass it on the credentials value. And we're going to do the same thing on create account, except we're going to emit a create account event. Okay. Let's go. Oh, I didn't want that there. Get that out of there. That does not belong there. That belongs in here. All right. So when I click either one of these, login or create account, it should take whatever data is in the credentials. It should emit an event that passes the values along. The other magical thing, well, let's save this. Let's go back to our story now so we can see how we're going to test this. So inside of stories, you see this arguments? You can pass arguments to the login form. And the way you pass the arguments to the login form is you bind whatever arguments are passed in to the form. So it's the same as when we go back to, let's look at our main app. So you see when I look here on my login form, sorry, I'd already pasted this code in. You can see I'm passing this this on create account event and this on do login event. Both are already here. So I need a way when I'm inside of my story to assign those two events to my form. Right? I can hard code them in, but the point is that what I really want to happen is I want those events to be translated to actions so that I can see them here in my action console. And now what Stories does, it provides a kind of shortcut way for you to do that with this thing called arg types. There's more information in the doc on it, and I'll copy paste some info in the bio. But for now, save some typing time. I'm just going to put it in here so that we can see what's going on. So now what this says is that it's going to take an argument type of on login, and it's going to associate an action called on login with it. So we should see it appear here, and it's going to do the same thing for on create account. And because we are passing these arguments, it will automatically create these arguments. They will get passed into args. They're returned, so I have access to them in the template, and then I'm basically just binding on login and on create account to my login form object, and the action that they need, well, not the action, the function that they will call, or what they'll do when the event is triggered, is they'll call this action, which is a helper that you get from from Storybook, and that action will trigger an on login, and by default, when you call these functions, the event or the object that's being passed along, the payload that's being passed along with the emitted event will come through also. And you'll see in the console here. The last thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we actually, nope, I think that's all we need to do. So let's see if we're getting our data and our events triggered. So let's just enter some dummy data and trigger login. So you see we have my on login event got triggered, and I got the payload that I entered in the field. If I click create account, you see the create account gets triggered and it has the information in it also. So why does this matter? Because now I can actually go back to my application, and if I'm in my application and you see where we've set up, not my application, in my main, where's my home? My home view, we have the same thing done here. We've bound on create account and on do login, and on login to these functions do create account and do login. And if we go down, we don't have these functions in place yet. So let's add them. Okay, and let's open up our console a bit here. So let's just put something in here. Login, create account. So it's emitting the events. So why is this not triggered? Right, there you go. So I was getting my terms I was getting my terms mixed up. The actual event that's triggered or emitted from the form, if we look at our form, where did our form go? Login form. The actual events that are emitted are, actually I didn't even include them. I need to include them. But as you can see, they're actually called login and create account. And Vue likes you to lay them out now. You see it has this emits here, and so it wants you to say what they are, so let's do it. So before I had put before in my, where's my preview? In my home view, I had said on, but it's not on. It's at create account. So when the create account event happens, and when the login event happens, then call this function do create and login for login. So let's refresh this. Let's go back to my story just to confirm that everything's still fine. Let's reload my story. If I say ARON and then pass, and I do login, it emits my event. It kind of emits my event. And on my event, I tell it to call this action, and the action is named on login. And then on create account, it's the same thing. So just to kind of wrap up, we have our login in our home view. This is how our login form works. It has two events that emits a create account and a do login. When we run them normally and we enter some information, blah, 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 we can see our events are being emitted, and we know they're being emitted because we're getting them logged out here in the bottom. The other thing that we want to do, see on the cancel, you're getting the same thing. We know that this is a cancel event, so actually let's put this in here so that we know that's what's really happening, so we can ensure that both of them are getting triggered. So let's do create account and do login. Let's close this. Let's try it again. So enter some information, login, do login, create account, do create account. So we know the proper events are being emitted. And so now if we're back in our form, so now if I needed to start to edit this, like, so for example, like right now we don't have any labels in our form. So if we go into our form, I can just start editing it here and quickly see the results. And so what we want is we want to add an ion label, and that's not what it's called ion, and change this to ion, and we want to call this email. Element is missing, sorry, end tag. Let's put our end tag on there. And so now we kind of get the ability to kind of do our work here and just really just focus on the UI, email this is password, without the complexity of constantly having to rebuild our app and go back to our app, and have the app relaunch and do all the normal setup. I can just start to do all my edits right here, and Storybook will keep track of it. If we dug in deeper, there's ways to add documentation. So this whole thing can be self-documenting inside of here. And then if you really go all in on it, what you get is you get the ability to just have, let's show this sidebar again. Okay. You can just imagine a whole collection of different components that you can just quickly test here in Storybook that are self-documented and everything. I mean, that's the real goal when you dig deep into this. But even if you're just starting out, and the place that I used at one time that was really beneficial to me was where we just had a whole bunch of forms and a whole bunch of different components that were in the application, and there were a lot of steps that you had to take to get to each one of them. And we just found that the advantage of just creating each one of the forms as separate stories, we were able to quickly kind of edit and iterate and deal with them. In a later video, I'll show you how. So for one example, we had to support not reactive form. We had to support form validation, and so it was interesting how we had to set up our stories to kind of how we needed to mock the data coming into forms and mock the form context that was in there. But like I said, this was really just about getting started. So we have everything set up. Video was a little bit longer than I thought. I will do a follow-up showing how to do the wrapping the form with form validation. I'll do another follow-up that shows you how you can actually use the arguments to pass data into your component and mock it. But this, like I said, was just to get started. Hope you enjoyed this. Please leave comments and feedback, and make sure you like and subscribe. Take care. Bye.